so we'll look at 7.3 briefly, and then we'll come back to you after that. 7.3, consideration of letter of support for HR 1383, the Secure Rural Schools Reauthorization Act of 2025. Supervisor Pyska, and I know Brock, you're here for this item, so if you can come up.
I'm also hoping that Director March is on. Is he on Zoom?
With one N.
Glenn with one N.
It's all right, we can get started. Superintendent Falkenberg is here to talk about the local impact of the secure rural schools not included in the federal funding currently, and he has can speak to the history and the impact that our schools will feel, as well as Director March. Hopefully he could join us. If not, I do have some notes because some of that funding is used by the county for infrastructure, particularly roads. It's usually split 50-50. So I will pass it over to you. Oh, and I'll also mention that this is something that NACO's been championing. So Supervisor Spatier and myself talked about this a lot on our trip to DC recently, about a month ago, nationally, how this is impacting counties. Happy to advocate for this.
Go ahead, Brock.
Well, I appreciate the time today. I am here just to ask that you generate a letter of support in favor of reauthorization of the Secure Rural Schools Act. In order to really understand the Secure Rural Schools Act, we first kind of have to take a look at the Forest Reserve Act. And the Forest Reserve Act came about around 1908. And at that point in time, it outlined the authority of the president to establish national forest lands and how those lands should be managed. Shortly after initiation, it was amended at the request of the states to address what we call the 25% pass-through rule, and it sets aside 25% of all timber sales on forest land, national forest land, to be distributed to the state, and that was later distributed directly to each county. That 25% is then split, 50% going to the county, 50% going to the schools. And within the Forest Reserve Act, schools may utilize 15% of those funds to address countywide educational initiatives, with the remainder of those funds being distributed to community college and school districts that contain national forest land or are adjacent to bordering national forest land. So in Lake County, we use 15% of the funds that are generated for the schools each year to offset the cost for the operation of the Taylor Observatory and the Norton Planetarium. We use 10% of those funds go to our local community colleges, with 9% going to Mendocino College and 1% going to Woodland College. And that's based on the amount of forest land that exists within their district. The remainder of the funds, which is 75%, is then distributed between Upper Lake, Lucerne, and Canocti Unified School District. 92% of that remainder going to Upper Lake Unified School District, 5% to Canocti, and 3% to Lucerne. Again, based on the percentage of forest land that is contained within their districts. Sometimes people get this Secure Rural Schools funding, or really I should say, maybe the Forest Reserve Act funding as PILT, payment in lieu of taxes. This is not payment in lieu of taxes. This is specifically utilized to address the impacts of activities in our national forests. Sometimes we have people frustrated that we can't distribute this money more broadly, as we have state forest land in our school districts. We have BLM land, Bureau of Land Management land in our school districts, and we have a military reserve land in our school districts. So all of our school districts have some sort of governmentally owned land within them, but this is distributed specifically to the districts that have national forest land. That model of funding, that 25% pass-through funding, basically went up until about the year 2000. And 10 years prior to that, we started to see a slump in timber sales across the nation as the Endangered Species Act started to limit or make it much more difficult to harvest timber on national forest land. So the Secure Rural Schools Act of 2000 was established as a temporary, short-term funding model while the federal government, Congress in particular, took on the task of balancing the demands of the the demands of the Endangered Species Act and reestablishing timber sales. They have never been able to come to a consensus on how to manage that. So for the last 25 years, counties and schools have continued to receive the Secure Rural Schools funding in lieu of the 25% payment pass-through. With the exception of 15-16, there was not a reauthorization of the Secure Rural Schools for that particular year. So that particular year, we only saw the funding for Forest Reserve, again, 15%. So we went from roughly $500,000 to $14,000 on that 25% sales. If we were not to receive this funding, ultimately we would have to answer the question of how do we continue to fund the observatory, the planetarium, and the funds that are passed through to the school districts, which would equal about 2.5 full-time equivalent teaching positions. And primarily you're going to see that impact in the Upper Lake Unified School District, but the other districts would be impacted as well. Are there any questions of me at this time?
Vice Chair?
So out of the 465, 2023 was the last year we have the number for it, looks like, and that was 465,000. That's what the report states, fiscal year 23.
That is roughly the number that we've received each of the last few years, about
Okay.
450
Okay, so
plus or
about
minus $1,000.
half of that, 232,000 or so would have gone to this the schools, and the other equal half would have gone to the county for roads. Is that
The other half, you are correct.
okay? Right.
Goes to the county, and I don't speak to the county just because I suspect you know more about how you're utilizing those funds than I do.
Okay, that was going to be a question I had for Glenn too. I don't know if he'll be here.
I'm not sure if we're going to have staff on, but I have some notes.
Yes, I think Matthew
Oh, great.
may be on as well.
Perfect.
Matthew?
Good afternoon, Board, and my apologies for not being in the chambers today. I do have this is Matthew Rothstein, Chief Deputy County Administrative Officer, and I do have information from Director March on what the impacts would be if our SRS funding is not received moving forward. Director March indicates that in the short term, SRS funds would be used for school area signage and for pavement markings and speed studies. And he noted that speed studies must be conducted by a traffic engineer, which is a contractor, not a staff person. And Director March indicated that they are interested in doing studies generally looking at the areas of schools to mitigate concerns as regarding the traffic patterns around schools and then to encourage people to slow down in the areas of our schools. So I just wanted to share that on behalf of Director March since he isn't immediately available, but those would certainly be significant impacts.
Thank you, Matthew.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so our letter of support is to Congressman Thompson. He's working collaboratively with Congressman LaMalfa on this. Our county is not being hit as hard as other counties in Northern California that have bigger areas, larger tracts of forest lands, but it is significant. It's significant enough for us to really have concerns and see the impact to our schools. And as you can see with the infrastructure piece from the county is to make our schools safer. So that's why I thought it was urgent to bring this to us so that we can have this discussion, so the board is fully aware of how this funding cut directly impacts us in Lake County.
Supervisor Sabatier?
Yeah, just a brief comment and a question. I think this is a bipartisan issue. I know I sat down in the White House with Modoc County, who is very red, very conservative, and they were very concerned about their losses as well. And so I think this goes across the board that people are not wanting to see this go away because it's been a support system and they've been utilizing it for the good reasons that we receive it. I did have a quick question. From what I understand, it expired in June of last year. It just hasn't necessarily been re-signed. Is that correct?
It expired in June of last year, and that means that it will fund this year.
It wasn't reauthorized.
It wasn't reauthorized, and we will stop receiving funding as of April of this year.
Okay. Well, it's too bad it wasn't reauthorized, but definitely in support of this letter to, I know we're speaking to the choir with our congressman, but appreciate what he's doing and anything we can do to back him up and let him know that we can help his voice become louder.
Did you have something? No. Yes, no, this has been, I know that the fly-in that RCRC had, Modoc County, I don't know if it was Ned or...
Oh, it's
or
Ned.
It's Ned. Yeah, so there's Ned, he's also a big part of RCRC, and then also Jerry Byrne, who's the chair of RCRC. When they had went out to DC, that is one of the topics of discussion they had when it came to this secure schools. And so, yes, this is a really important letter as well, because I know you had mentioned the studies, or I think Matthew had mentioned the studies that Glenn wants to conduct, and there has been a lot of issues regarding speeding around schools and whatnot, as you know, Supervisor Owen. So this funding is critical in that aspect. So of course, naturally, I think we're all on the same page with supporting this letter. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, Brock, or if I should open it up to the public from there.
I don't have anything I'd like to add. I just want to make sure I thank all of you for your consideration and anything we can do to assist the schools and assist with the infrastructure around the schools, I think is needed at this point. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone from the public would like to speak on this item? Anyone on Zoom? I'll bring it back to the board for action.
Mr. Chair, oh, do you have something?
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to second.
Oh, Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the letter of support for HR 1383, the Secure Rural Schools Reauthorization Act of 2025, and authorize the chair to sign.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 500. Thank you, Brock, for coming forward, and thank you, Matthew, for helping us out with that.
Thank you.